Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson with my radio show Author to Author, and I'm here tonight interviewing T.J. Burdick again. And this time he's going to talk about another book he wrote, 99 Ways to Teach Like the Master. Hi, T.J. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's good to talk to you again. I enjoyed our last interview.
Yeah, I agree too. It's been a while, but it's nice to catch up.
Yes, I agree. Would you like to start us with a prayer?
Of course. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Father, Blessed Mother, and Saint Joseph, we thank you for allowing us this time to be able to communicate with one another and to be able to teach as the way your Son taught us. We ask that all the people who are struggling right now, especially through the pandemic, and especially those parents who are struggling with educating their own children, we ask that you intercede for them, intercede with us during this conversation, so that all of our instruction can be based in the primary lessons that you want us to learn in life. Amen.
Mm-hmm. Amen. So what is it that led you to write this book?
It's actually a really interesting story. So obviously I'm a teacher, so I graduated in 2006 from my local university here with my certificate in education, elementary education. But after my first year of teaching, my wife and I decided to go to Mexico, her native country, and we were going to serve as missionaries down there. And we ended up serving alongside the Lasallian brothers, nice little order of religious men. They're not priests, but they're dedicated to education after the instruction they received from St. Francis de La Salle in France. A lovely little community, especially in Mexico. It's actually quite thriving down there. Not so many here in the United States, but there's quite a few down there in Mexico. Anyway, we were taking care of Casa Hogar, which is kind of like an orphanage, if you will. And so my wife and I were working alongside with three brothers, and their order had been kind of a trademark of Mexican education system for quite a while, but most importantly during the time when the religious persecutions were occurring in Mexico. Obviously, the Catholic Church was pretty much outlawed, and they weren't allowed to practice being Catholic at all, except the thing is that the Lasallian brothers, their schools were so good that the anti-Catholic regime allowed their schools to continue to stay open. Because they were they're really good at what they were doing under the confines that they couldn't speak about the Catholic faith, they couldn't teach about the Catholic faith, they could only teach, reading, writing, arithmetic, what have you, right? And so there's a story that goes around that there was one soldier who was moving to a different state in Mexico, and he ran into, his new soldier mates. And he was asking around, where should I send my kids? My kids, they need to go to school. What's the best school? And one of the soldiers ended up replying back to him saying, well, you should probably send them to the Lasallian schools, but you need to be really careful because they somehow managed to teach catechism and math class. And so that got me thinking. That got me thinking because I knew, as a teacher here in the United States, especially one who was looking to start his own family. My in was in the public education system, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to live out my faith as much as I would be able to in the Catholic school system, which unfortunately didn't pay enough for my family to be able to survive. And so the first job I got back was in the public school system, and I'm still there. I'm still in the public schools, and I love it to death. But the thing is, I wanted to be able to understand. I wanted to figure out a way to do what the Lasallians did, to be able to live my Catholic faith and to be, an evangelist in a classroom that wouldn't allow me to mention the name Jesus. And so I decided to write this book, 99 Ways to Teach Like the Master, because I found when I got back from being a missionary, I started reading through the Gospels, and after each Gospel selection, I would write a short reflection about how I could institute Jesus' teaching methods, his pedagogy, in my own instruction as a teacher. And I found out quickly that Jesus' teaching methods, albeit, more than 2,000 years old, were as effective or more so than what I had learned during my 4 years of college prep training. So I was like, okay, there's something here. And so I ended up writing, after each section of the gospel, a short reflection, about 3 or 4 paragraphs, just to kind of remind myself as to how I could do that. And I got through all 4 of the gospels. So I had over, 300 or 400 different, reflections on how Jesus was a teacher. And I chose the top 99, the ones that were the most influential for me. And there we have the book, 99 Ways to Teach Like the Master.
Excellent. That's really a good approach to learning not only what he taught, but how he taught it. I like that.
Yep, exactly. He's obviously, they call him teacher, and we call him the master teacher, and so I figured, well, there's something to this, I think more teachers need to be able to live this in their vocation. I think it's something that a lot of teachers struggle with.
Yeah, I think that's true. So you have 99 lessons here for us. Would you like to go through the ones that you think are most significant?
Of course, sure. Well, the way that the book is actually fashioned is based on a lot of what I would call Maslow's hierarchy. Well, actually, not what I call, but what actually the world calls Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and basically states that a child can't learn unless there are certain things that have been taken care of prior to their ability to think. So obviously, the first is the most necessary needs of like food and shelter, water. And then it kind of grows up higher until you get to the last level, which would be, the mental challenge and stimuli to be able to think deeply. Because somebody who's, surviving right now, or somebody who is in survival mode, isn't going to be able to, read Poe or anything like that and interpret a poem. They're going to be thinking about how they're going to survive the next day. And I think it's very similar to how teachers, especially in their first 5 years, approach their own craft. Because when you're thrown into a classroom for the first couple of years, it's very, very hard to do because you're learning curriculum, you're learning classroom management, you're learning your district, you're learning a lot of different things. You're basically in survival mode. And unfortunately, that's the reason why most teachers, actually more than 50%, leave the profession within their first 5 years, just because there's a lot of reasons, but top being low pay, not really appreciated, and it's very stressful. If you can get over that hump, you've kind of understood the idea of, okay, I know what I need as a teacher, I know what I can provide my students, I know what I'm capable of doing, and then you just do it, right? So the way I fashioned this book was based on that, but more in a spiritual sense. So the first section is dedicated to the essentials, the things that we all need, which would be, prayer, family, clothes, food, things like that. Little things that Jesus used in his lessons to be able to communicate a deeper meaning. Then it goes on to his teaching philosophy, which is the next section, because every teacher, as they're learning how to get through the essentials and survive, they're building up what is their own teaching philosophy. Then from there, there's a really, really big, long section called his teaching methods, because once you have your philosophy, then you can start instituting means by which you're going to teach your students, and Jesus provides a plethora. The whole gospel is filled with his pedagogy and his methodology. So there's a very, very long section of methods. It's almost, 50 chapters long, 60 chapters long. And after that, there's a section that is titled His Passion and Our Mission, and it basically takes you through the difficult parts of Jesus' ministry, obviously his passion, death, and then later goes on to what I call our continuing education, because as teachers, even after we do our methods, every year we have to continue to educate ourselves on the best practices and the best methods, And so the final section is very short. It's only about 5 different chapters, and it's all about our continuing education. So it's kind of like a playoff on Christ's resurrection, because even Christ, after he resurrected, still had work to do. And so that's kind of how I see the teaching profession, starting with the essentials, moving on to philosophy, then thinking about the methodology, and then moving on to the very difficult parts of teaching, which is kind of like that cross that we always have to bear, those difficult students, things like that. And then, of course, our continuing education. How do we keep on doing this for 40 years without going crazy?
Yeah. I agree. That's quite a long career that people tend to put in. So when you look over this, what would you consider to be the most interesting section?
Let's see here. I think I would probably say the methods, the teaching methods, because there's so many of them and they're so very interesting. There's different ways that you can approach your teaching, but all of them are good. One of them I think I've gotten the most positive feedback is, this is the title, I kid you not, 5 loaves plus 2 fish multiplied by 1 blessing equals a whole lot of holiness. And so
I love that.
It's basically a play on, I wanted to keep that title the way it was because it kind of reminded me of the Lasallians who are teaching catechism in math class. So when you think about it, I'll read a little section of the chapter here. It's taken from Mark's Gospel, chapter 6, verses 41 through 42, that read, "Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and he divided the 2 fish among them all, and all ate and were filled." And so what I do in the next section is I take the word to bless, and we define it as, according to dictionary.com, to make or pronounce holy. And we see Jesus doing that with fish and with loaves. Anything that we do, though, however, as Christians, we have the ability to recognize that what is holy in many aspects of our vocation. So in the fruits of our labor, in the smile of a child, in the warmth of the sun on a recess, in the subjects we teach, and in the plans we make, and in the execution of those lessons, etc. And so the thing is that this chapter is basically a primer in metaphysics. It's being able to go deeper into whatever it is that we're doing in a classroom and finding God in it, and then allowing yourself to become the God, not the God, but like the representation of God for the students. That's another really, really evocative image that the Lasallians give to teachers. They consider themselves like the guardian angels of their students. And so they take every precaution to make sure that they're protected, both physically and spiritually, but they do so through an academic angle. And it's really interesting to see what types of teachers have that already kind of inside their vocational call, and it's very easy to tell which ones do not, because you can see the happy teachers who love what they do because there's a metaphysical angle to it, and there are other teachers who just don't see that, and they trudge along, they look forward to the weekend, they love whenever there's days off, you can't convince them one way or another that what they're doing is good because they just see it as a job, And it's more than that. Teaching is a vocation.
Yes, definitely. So it's interesting when you think of it as a vocation, and there are so many different ways we do it. I taught in the classroom for years, and now I just teach online. And it's just amazing to see the different kinds of methods you have to use to get the same information across. Even if you're talking into a tape, it doesn't come out exactly like it would when you have people sitting there looking at you and you're looking at them, So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a hard sell right now with everything that's going on with the educational systems. My district just closed down for the rest of the year for face-to-face and building meetups. Now, if whatever we do for our students now has to be done online, and I can even, like you said, if you do a recording, something gets lost in translation. If you even do video conferencing, even then something gets lost in translation. There's something about being physically present and understanding the slight pause, for example, in a teacher's voice, or the way that they look at you when they ask you a question, or the body language that your students are giving back to you. There's so much involved that it's definitely an art, but it's also science. And so it's interesting to notice that how those two can kind of crash into one another like two tsunamis in one. Trying to figure out how is 35 students in this room reacting to the way that I'm presenting information, and how can I read that? And how can I make sure that each one is currently on the task that I need them to be in order to advance in their academic success? And it takes a lot of brain power, which is why, by the end of the day, most teachers are just ready to kick back and watch Netflix and not do a thing.
Yeah, but that, of course, is what you're basically losing when you're doing the online. See, I've been teaching online now for many years, and it's a good mode of delivery, I think, at the graduate level and perhaps undergraduate level, because people can ask questions. You have more time to answer them, that sort of thing. But I can't imagine trying to do that with children or even high school. It's there's just too much of that social interaction that has to occur between the professor and the teacher and the students.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the younger you are, the more contact you need.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Anyway, but it's a little interesting pathway into some different teaching methods. But other things that you thought were interesting in here.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably the most, and I wouldn't say this is the most important chapter, but I think it's the most important tool in any teacher's arsenal is the ability to story tell. The best teachers I ever had were the ones who could tell the best stories. They were the most creative. They're the ones that could think of an idea on the fly and just go with it, right? And so when you think of Jesus as the master teacher, that was his bread and butter, was storytelling. Obviously, he used parables to make sure that the people in the area could understand the deep metaphysical, theological truth within a very simple story that they could relate to. And so storytelling becomes something very, very, very huge for Jesus, but it also does the same for us as teachers and parents and grandparents. This is the reason why, when Grandma and Grandpa come over for dinner, we listen. Whenever the teacher goes on a tangent about something that might not be related to what they're currently talking about, the students are engaged. They're listening. This is why we love stories. This is why we have Netflix accounts. This is why we read books, because we're always looking for the next best story to pull us into something more deeper than our current reality, so that we can actually understand our reality deeper. And so I always say the best teachers, I can tell by how good of a teacher you are, how good of a story you can tell. And that's what Jesus did best, was he told great stories that grabbed the people and made them understand concepts. Maybe not completely, because even his apostles, after he would tell all of these parables, they couldn't understand it. I always think about those students. There's several students that no matter how hard you try, they just won't understand. And Jesus felt that frustration. He had to, at one point, he had to call them all in. He had to explain all the parables to them. Even after explaining the parables to them, they still didn't get it. And it wasn't until after his death and resurrection that they finally understood. And I think that's something that we as teachers have to take into account, is that, yes, our stories are first and foremost, it's our bread and butter, but we actually have to get deeper. We have to really die for our students in a way that helps us get into their world. Basically, we can't just stop at the story. We have to live it,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting, too, that his stories were all very short. They weren't, like a chapter long. They were just a few verses usually. And they pack real punch,
what they did was they made them think. Jesus never gave them answers. He gave his apostles answers, but he never gave the crowd answers. He gave them a story, and they had to think about it. And that's what a good teacher does. He doesn't give you answers. He makes you think about things outside of the box, outside of what you currently would do, so that you yourself can come to them individually. If you can't do that as a teacher, you have no business teaching, because you're not making kids think, and I think that's what Jesus did masterfully, and he still does today.
Yeah. So, that's a good point. People do have to work. It's not just, it isn't that people are like these open vessels, you just pour something in and it's good to go. It's cumulative. They have to be able to think about it. They have to be able to compare with other stories. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff they have to do. But I think people don't necessarily think of that. They think of it as just being passive. They get filled up by what
anything but passive. It's the most aggressive thing that we have on the planet is learning. I mean, the people who... that's what happens is that once you love something, once you have a passion for something, you're going to go all in and find any angle possible to learn how to do that. And you're going to find the people who have already been doing that, who are your teachers. And that's why I say education is definitely not a passive thing, although it's coming off as such. And unfortunately, for a lot of students in our education system today, it is a passive thing. They aren't engaged. They aren't motivated. And so once they know what they want to do with life, however, that's the key. That's when they're able to go after it, and that's when they're able to really be aggressive in their learning. But that's all education should be that way. Unfortunately, the systems that we have in place don't necessarily do that.
Yeah. So that is something interesting, because so often I have heard of people as just sitting there and taking it in, and that's, the more they can take in, they think the more educated they are, but they never learn to think. So. Okay, I'm just scrolling through. Just scrolling through. Let's see. It's got so many good stories here. So many little, Well, here's a good one. Responding to "I don't get it."
Yep.
Yeah.
I get that one a lot.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us about that one?
Sure. So obviously, one of the things, I teach 6th grade, so I have 11 and 12-year-old students all year. And a lot of times, and I should add another level of difficulty. I teach in a Spanish immersion program, so I teach in Spanish to students who don't know Spanish perfectly. So I teach them in their second language. So a lot of times I'll get students, when I ask them to break out and do their work, that just kind of veg and just kind of stay there and kind of they disassociate themselves with the world. They're in space. And so when I go over there and I notice that, and I'm like, hey, is there anything I can help you with? What's going on here? And they're like, I don't get it. Well, in my classroom, that's not an acceptable comment. You're not allowed to say, I don't get it. The whole idea is to take into account this idea of questions. Questions are a motivating thing. Like you said earlier, I don't get it is a passive thing, but if you have a particular question about something, then you are aggressively trying to understand a concept. So I don't get it doesn't work in my classroom because you're being passive. So what I tell my students is this: whenever they say I don't get it, I'm like, that's really sad. Do you have any specific question that I might be able to answer that would help you get it? And then they're like, oh, well, now I'm thinking something. Well, yeah, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to what? What do I need to do for number one? What does it say in number one? Okay, did it. What don't you understand about number one? This word. I don't know what that word is. Oh, this word means this such and such a thing. Oh, do you get it now? Yes, I get it. See, that's why the question, it's the Socratic method. The more questions you ask, the more you understand. And so that's what occurred, that the gospel that particular chapter was based on was when Jesus was talking to the disciples who didn't get his parables, when he had to say, do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all of the parables I'm trying to tell you? And then he had to basically say, that's not the right way of saying things. You have to really focus. You have to really ask questions. You have to be aggressive in your learning. If you don't, then you will not understand anything I say, because I don't get it isn't acceptable in my classroom. You can't get off on that.
No, it isn't. I think when they say I don't get it, again, it's passive just because they expect you to do the work to pour it into them. And so when you say, well, you have to ask a question, all right, that kind of turns it around on them. So, it is definitely passive.
Yep, and being able to do that, though, requires that you do understand your material a lot more than anyone else in this world. Because if you aren't able to, this is why I say, if you can front end your lessons, and so basically that means put all of the hard work into the delivery and the content that you'll be giving the students, so that there's absolutely no question that they won't get it. They will inevitably not get it even after all of your efforts, but at least you've come prepared. But then that requires the whole front loading of understanding is that all the work must be put on the students. You become a catalyst as a teacher so that the students can use their brains to be able to come up with their learning themselves. If you're successfully able to do that, that does take a lot of work. It takes years of understanding your content and building. But if you can get to that level, to the point that you can pose a question instead of I don't get it, and keep on posing those questions until they do, then you become a master teacher. And I think that's what Jesus was so good at, was he was constantly telling these stories, and he was constantly teaching his disciples individually, but yet he was always he was front-loading for what was eventually going to be his greatest lesson, which was his death and resurrection, because that's when their eyes were completely opened. Christ's ministry was basically just one big lesson, and he front-loaded it for his time in Galilee and his journey to Jerusalem. He was front-loading. This is what's going to happen. This is going to happen. This is how it's going to happen. And then, boom, once it all happened, they all understood. And that's what good teachers do. They front-load. And then when the lesson actually occurs, you're basically kind of crucifying yourself in front of the kids because you've worked so hard to develop the lesson that all of a sudden, boom, they get it, and now they have to live it, which means they have to aggressively learn how to do that.
Yeah, that's a good explanation of it. So let's see. We have lots on how to do this, how to do the education. Let's see. I'm looking for the next section, actually. Oh, using new media. That's interesting. Yeah. What did you talk about in using new media, number 38?
Well, that one has actually evolved a lot since I wrote this book. New media, obviously, I wrote this book at the turn of the tech as well. I was in the throes of writing this book about 10 years ago, before the big tech boom hit. And so new media was the hot ticket, and it still is. I mean, there was definitely a lot of ways that we're able to use media. But basically what I was getting to is that Jesus himself was using the technology of the time to be able to teach his lessons to other students. Now, we typically think of Jesus as, obviously he was poor. He didn't have a whole lot of resources. But at one point he got up on the boats because there were so many people. And he moved himself out onto the water and was speaking to them using the natural echo of the water that was on him, so that his voice was able to be multiplied, to be able to extend to all the people that were on the beach listening. And so when I thought about that, I thought instantly of Facebook and Twitter and how our messages are able to be multiplied across space and time through the use of new media. And that was kind of the angle that I was going in. But I also realized since then that too much media obviously can be detrimental to learning. In fact, at that point, I was very big into using technology to advance my students' learning. Now, not so much, because I've realized that there's a lot of danger at the 11 and 12-year-old age of using tech too much because they get so much at home. And so I decided to go a little bit more brick and mortar. I use a little bit less, actually a lot less technology than I used to. I only use it when it's a necessary efficiency tool for my students to work. And very rarely do I allow them to type or do anything like that, just because I need them to write in Spanish, and I want to see what their actual errors are. And so if they write on a document, they can get their errors automatically corrected whenever that lower red line comes up underneath that says this word is spelled wrong. So I've had to downsize it a little bit, but at the same time, if I were to work with older students, I think I would use a lot more new media than I currently do now. That being said, we do have a classroom podcast. We have a YouTube channel. We do use a lot of new media, but it's not nearly as much as I used to, because truthfully, the students don't need that at that age in their developmental level. If I was teaching high school or college, I'd be all over it, but it's not a necessary thing for an elementary level. In fact, it's a detrimental thing for most elementary kids.
Yeah, that's interesting in itself when you think of how much time most of them spend on some kind of media. So I imagine they go home and that's basically what they do.
Exactly. Yeah, if they're not at their soccer practices or at their chess meetings or at their robot building classes, the kids have worse schedules than I do. I keep on making fun of them for that. I'm like, holy cow, you guys do a lot more than I do.
Yeah, that's good. As I'm scrolling through here, I'm seeing a lot of beautiful artwork. And I remember talking to you about art in the past, so I'm trying to see what the title of this piece is. Sermon on the Mount. But yeah, you have captured appropriate pictures again.
That one I can't put any credit on me for that one. That was actually my editor, Dr. Mahfood. So they were the ones that were in charge of choosing the art for that one. Yep. This one was all the words are mine, but none of the art.
Yeah, the art adds a lot. It's funny when you think of it, because we're such a, when the intellectuals we read, we don't necessarily look for the pictures unless you happen to be into, studying art or something. But for kids, I think it's the exact opposite. They live in a very visual world. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What I found when I see my students doing research on their laptops, if I go around and I watch, whenever they search for information, you and I, we type in, we go into Google, and we look for the articles, and we click on the links, and we go to the websites, right? But they actually go to Google, but instead of the search bar that says, all or news, they go to images. It's really interesting. I've never seen this before. This started happening in the last 2 or 3 years. If they want to understand something, they go to the images section. They type in what they're looking for, and they look for a meme, they look for a picture, they look for a graph. The last thing they want to do is click on a website and read through it. They want to see a picture of it, and it's super interesting to me. Yeah.
It's almost like a summary for them. Yeah.
Well, it's efficient too, because I think back 10 years ago when I was writing this book, even when I was in high school and college, if you were to type in Google and images, there weren't enough images to even populate. Now images are all over the place, and now there's a multitude of ways to learn that particular thing. My daughter, she wrote she's 9, and one of the assignments that her teacher gave her just last week was to research information on an animal that's endangered. And she had to write a 5-paragraph essay. I'm like, wow, 9-year-old writing a 5-paragraph essay. This is going to be interesting. Let's see how it goes. And sure enough, I just let her go, and I was observing her. And the first thing she did, instead of going to books, she went to YouTube. And as she was watching this documentary on loggerhead turtles, She was writing down the information on her Google Doc, and when she showed it to me before she handed it in, it was miraculously beautiful. I'm like, did you just find this from the YouTube video? She's like, I found most of it from the YouTube video, but I did read a couple other books, and what the book said pretty much said the same thing that the YouTube video was saying. And I'm like, wow, that is amazing. I'm impressed. Keep on doing your work, because you wrote a fantastic essay. But, I mean, that's just the world we live in when, a video or a podcast is going to be just as good as a book if it's presented well enough. And if you can, be able to fact check them, which my daughter did, that's another skill. I mean, that's a huge skill you have to learn in the digital world is learning how to fact check. And I was impressed she was able to do that at 9, to be honest with you.
But they're smart now, I'll tell you. It's interesting, too, because when you think of images, I don't think we realize how many images we see even when we're watching television. I had a student who was in Father Groshel's order, and he told me that they don't watch television, of course, but he was living at the seminary, he was a seminarian, and he happened to be walking by a room, like a living room, that had a TV on, and he said he stood there, and he said he had to close his eyes because the images changed so fast it made him dizzy.
Oh, that poor guy.
Yeah, but I mean, really, when we look at it, I don't think that happens to us. I mean, it's rare that I look at something and I have to look away. I don't think that's actually ever happened. But have to look away because I got dizzy. But it's like it was just they flashed so quick. But each of them really gives you a message. It's a different way of getting into your intellect,
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you think of the number. A couple of 100 years ago, people would go look at a painting, and now it's like they look at the television and they probably see, in 5 minutes more images than they would see in a lifetime if they were looking at paintings. It's amazing. The technology really is amazing. So here's an interesting title here, this number 55, Understanding God's Report Card.
That was a blast of a chapter to make. I love that one. So we were actually in the middle of creating our report cards for our classroom because we had to go through some what's the word? We were redoing report cards for the district, and they wanted our feedback. And I was like, I wonder if I can be able to make my own report card for a teacher and how they're doing as a teacher, trying to live out their Catholic lifestyle in public school. And even before then, it's more than that. It's more just like, how can anybody, what is a report card in life? Like if you go and you're at the pearly gates, you pass away in St. Peter's there, if you look at the report card of your life, what would you score? So it was interesting kind of a way to think about it because, I think in lesson plans and I think in report cards. And so it was kind of a way for me to gauge my own, where am I at right now and where could everybody else be as well when it comes to, learning how to become a good person and be able to deserve, not that we deserve it at all, but to be able to see what would occur if we were going to, if Jesus was a teacher, which he was, he might have a report card for us, I would like to think he would, but, and I would really, really hope that he offers extra credit because truthfully, I don't think a lot of us are making it right now. It's nice that here in the book you actually have, I'm just seeing 2 pages of, might be more here. Yeah, just 2 pages of a report card. Very interesting. Yep. And it's a really fun thing to look at. I sent it to my dad at one point. I think he was like, "Oh, this is the best thing ever."
Yeah.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah. So. Okay. Were there other chapters in here or other sections in here that you particularly enjoyed?
Yeah, I think one of the last ones in the final section is titled "You Can't Do It All." And I think teachers have this idea that they can do anything, especially first, second, third, fourth year, fifth year teachers. They have this idea that they've been given these lives to impact and these subjects to do it through, and all these materials that they either purchase on their own or that the district has purchased for them. And I think they seem to think that, and it's not necessarily their own fault, but I think colleges kind of pump them up to be able to idealize the whole idea of being a teacher. And they think that they can do everything because they're creative, because they are motivated, they have that vocation, that calling, And this is just when I came to the realization that I couldn't do it all. That was the defining moment of my teaching career. Was when I realized that not all of this is on me. In fact, the vast majority of everything that I'm doing right now, as Mother Teresa as we can quote Mother Teresa, we ourselves feel that what we are doing is just a drop in the ocean, but the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. And I think that, for teachers, they think that they're their own garden hose, that they can fill up the ocean by themselves. And it's definitely not the way to think about it. You'll go crazy in the educational system. You'll go crazy as a parent. You'll go crazy in any profession if you think you can do it all. And I think that the main lesson in that chapter and in this whole book is that, yes, you've been given these skills, you've been given all these blessings in technology and professional development, and even in your Catholic faith, but even if you are Catholic, even if you are a believer, even if you are a Christian or whatever you are, if you're not letting Jesus control it, and if you're not allowing him to give you the energy and the know-how to be able to do it well, it's not going to be enough, because you can't do it alone. And it's not just that either. It's your colleagues, it's your students, it's your students' parents, it's the principals, it's the administration, it's the district itself, it's the community. It's all tied into one. And I think a lot of teachers think of themselves as their own island, and they think they're self-sufficient. And that's not the case.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. I think you can also think of that you can do it all another way. I don't know if you've thought of it. I'm older than you. But I know that there are many women in my age group. I'm 70. And, we were the old feminists. Well, we weren't old when we were feminists. And we were young then. But we just had that impression, that no matter what you wanted to do, you could do it. You could be it. Like, life is unlimited. And to this day, I will occasionally talk to people that I went to grad school with. I graduated in 85. And I will talk to people I graduated with, and they're like, well, I haven't really decided what I want to be at when I grow up. And it's like, I hate to tell you, but you're going to die soon. You haven't made it. But it's kind of the same idea there. It's like being able to do it all as a teacher or being able to do it all in life. There's something about our ability to see how many options there are now that they just fascinate us, I think, and we get caught up in that.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with you there completely. And I think coming, from the religious side of things, think about Mother Teresa. She went out to India, one of the poorest country in the world, and definitely non-Catholic. And she did not convert the country by any means. They're still very much Buddhist and Muslim. There wasn't a conversion at all.
Yep.
And so some people would look at that and say, oh, she was a failure. I would definitely say definitely not, because she was providing God's mercy to those most in need. But if you take a look at her and then you take a look at Jesus himself, Jesus was God. And he didn't even convert the world, We're still debating whether or not he even existed at this time of day. And then that's kind of the angle I wanted to give teachers, is that, hey, Mother Teresa didn't convert India. Jesus himself couldn't convert the entire world. At least he could have, but he didn't, And so who are we to think that every single one of our students is going to grow exponentially throughout the school year because of our teaching? Probably not. In fact, the vast majority of your students are going to forget about you once they get older. It'll be very rare that they can even remember who their sixth grade teacher was, And so it's not necessarily, you're just a drop in the ocean. But you do have to obviously work your tail off to be able to make sure that you've given the best effort. But that doesn't mean you should be, required to have success. I think Mother Teresa once was quoted saying, "It's not my job to be successful; it's my job to be faithful." And that's the message I wanted to drive home towards the end of this book.
Yeah. Very good. So was there anything else in particular that you'd like to bring up before we end?
I think, this is a great book. If especially, I think it's very well designed for obviously teachers in a public setting, Catholic teachers who find themselves teaching in public school, but it's also really good for Catholic school teachers. And I've heard very good feedback from homeschooling parents who don't have education as their background because they don't necessarily know how to teach, but this helped them out a lot. And I've also heard that some good feedback from catechists. Catechists typically don't have an educational background. Sometimes it's theological, sometimes it's philosophical, sometimes it's just volunteer because I want to, help my parish. And a lot of them don't know how to teach. And so this is a great primer on how to do that, how to use Jesus' teaching methods in your classrooms or in your catechism class or VBS or whatever it may be. It gives you a really good idea of how to teach the way Jesus taught.
Yeah, that's very good. That's a excellent way to close. So would you like to close us with a prayer?
Sure, that would be great. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, Holy Mother, and of course St. Joseph, you three teachers are the ones who have taught us all. You've taught Jesus, you've taught the world, you've taught us directly to our hearts, you've taught us at Mass and the Eucharist through the Gospels. Without you, we would not understand what it means to understand life and understand the afterlife and understand your great mercy for us. We ask, Lord, that you bless teachers, parents, coaches, catechists, and anybody who finds themselves in the throes of education or teaching or speaking with young people. We ask that you give them the tools necessary to change their minds towards the metaphysical realities that are you, whether it be teaching math or religion or philosophy or even science or anything. We ask, Lord, that you open up our minds to understand the deeper truths behind everything that is taught, which is you. We pray this in the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much for letting me interview you again, TJ, and when your next book comes out, you let me know and we'll do it again.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Okay. You take care.
You too.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.